to learn about early in my time in Washington, D.C., because they were working not only in Washington, D.C., but across the country, and specifically in Chicago, around reducing violent crime through alternative methods than police. And the most importantly was through violence interruption programs. And it was something that I had the opportunity to teach and to engage with in past work doing social and emotional character development, but helping young people especially understand how to resolve their conflicts nonviolently. And I think we take for granted that peace and nonviolence is something that needs to be taught. We obviously spend a lot of time teaching people how to engage in wars around the world, and I think we take peace for granted. And so what Cure Violence did was they went around and started teaching peace, and they went around teaching people nonviolence and how to resolve their conflicts before they escalated to a point of violence. And what they did that was so unique is that they studied it scientifically, and they were actually able to work with the CDC and show dramatic results in crime rates dropping after these programs are implemented. And it's remarkable, going back to social emotional character development, there was an organization called Castle, which also does the same, as they take kind of the soft stuff, the character development stuff, and they look at how it impacts science scores and math scores. And it was something wild, something like 1 hour of this conflict resolution, peace building activities, 1 hour with kids every other week, you would see I think it was 14% increase in math scores. Because once a kid can actually sit there without worrying about all of these people maybe making fun of him or bullying him or causing conflict, they could actually study, they could learn, and they could increase their results. And so we see that the same thing in our society. If we can avoid these violent and find peace, our society operates much better. And so that's what Marcus was doing in Chicago. And he was actually the person, one of the people, but the drivers around setting up the Cure the Streets program here in Washington, D.C. through the Office of the Attorney General. And that's one of two large programs that do violence interruption programs. This is the Cure the Streets program through the Office of Attorney General, and then the mayor through the executive office. There's the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. And the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, through different grant programs within our community, it's the Collaborative Solutions for Communities, is the grantee that does violence interruption in Columbia Heights and other places in Ward 1. So Chico, I would imagine your work is similar to Marcus's, and you have your own background and experience that I would love for you to share with us. The driving reason that I wanted to bring Dr. Tillman here was kind of where we left off our last public safety meeting, was asking the council member, what does it look like for a community to begin resolving violence? And where is it that we should hold our elected officials accountable? What is it that an elected official can do? And what can they not do? Because we often hear about talking about voting for things and programs, but we're still seeing in Washington, D.C., an increase in homicides already in 2021 over 2020. So we know that the violent homicide rate is not getting better. But who's accountable for that? And how as citizens do we hold our elected officials accountable? Because they say, you know what, well, we did everything we can. Is that true? Is it not true? And so I'm really excited for Dr. Tillman, who has national and international experience doing this work, who's seen success, and he's also seen failure along the way, and can help us kind of way through those two. So that's my longer introduction of why we invited Dr. Tillman here and his expertise and background. So Dr. Tillman, if you could tell us maybe a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of your work over the year, and then just tell us where you're at right now and how you're feeling.
Okay, I'll start by saying I'm in Chicago, Illinois. The thing I liked to do in the snow growing up was play football in the snow.
Okay,
so
cool.
We used to often play football in the snow in Chicago. So that's like a cultural thing where we play football. Really in the city, we go to the park and play football in the snow. In terms of Marcus and I were colleagues at Cure Violence. So I initially started out at Cure Violence about a little bit over a decade ago, about around a decade ago. I started out as a violence interrupter. So I've done some direct service and violence interrupter and outreach. I've been a program manager. So I ran a site. I've been a senior program manager and ran a city. And of course, I was doing the same work Marcus did as a national trainer, went around the country and the world and started organizations from ideation all the way to implementation. And by the way, I'm familiar with Cure the Streets. I know the staff, me and Lashana, who's the director over there, Thompson Ill, I got a relationship with her. So I've trained people all over the United States in violence prevention and helped start them, not only trained them, but started the program, hired them, did the hiring process, worked with the cities and counties, but also built out the program. And even now I'm building out a few programs in Texas and helping them think about what violence prevention could look like in Denver. The biggest difference between Marcus and I is Marcus stayed on the practitioner side doing direct service, but also I went back to school and of course got my PhD in criminology, law and justice from the University of Illinois at Chicago. So I understand it theoretically, but also I understand it as a practitioner. So it looks some of the things I've learned. The models or the public health approach or the approach to violence look different in different cities, even though it's the same, because each city has its unique set of problems. And one of the things I try to do now is research the city to understand the crime data, do a crime data analysis, asset map is to see what's already in the city, and then create this model around the challenges in the city with the same scientific approach, but modify it somewhat to fit the desired needs of the city. That's what I think. One of the things that I learned that evolved my thinking, even I love the cure violence model, but one of the things that I learned as a practitioner with cure violence and since I left is that too much responsibility and pressure was put on one organization to change a whole community, and it's just not going to happen. It has to be an ecological systems approach where everybody or every institution and agency within this ecology are on board to stopping violence, because one institution can't completely service it and flip the community, because you really have to change the mindsets, not only of the individuals you service, but the way the community thinks about conflict. And that's why it's so important that you have this interconnectedness to different agencies and institutions, because you want to change, like if an altercation happens between two individuals, that they are not contemplating the end result is that we're going to get a gun or we're going to resolve it in violence. We want to change the normative behavior so that when we get into altercation or conflict, because conflict is normal. Conflict is simply disagreement. You believe this, I believe that. Resolution is where the challenge. How do we solve what we don't agree on? So the problem in communities that are disinvested or vulnerable is typically they respond to aggression because they don't have conflict resolution skills. Typically, they respond to aggression, and it's more spontaneity, where you respond spontaneously and physically. And since as we've evolved, we understand that a lot of times now, those responses are with guns. So we want to move away from that space and get to a space where, hey, it's no longer cool to do that. One of the examples that's often used in the cure violence model, and it's an amazing example, is everybody on here at least 30, 25, 15. Let me see. No, but no, if you think about, if you're about 30 and if you watch a movie that's 30 years old, you're going to see something interesting. You might see a movie where the social worker or the lawyer or whoever is smoking a cigarette while they talking to the person, or smoking a cigar in the building. They talking, and you was like, this is weird, but that was the norm. Now you can't even smoke a cigarette around the building, let alone while you talking to a client. That's because why? The whole community or the whole society said, you know what? That's not that's not the best normative. And when I say norm, it means normative behavior, but we say social norms. We got to change the way we look at violence. And really, if you think about the success of cure violence or any approach to violence or anything that mitigates violence, I'm going to tell you this, I emphatically believe, and I will bet my life, if you start a program, there's going to be a decrease. And I'm going to tell you why. Obvious. If you engage individuals that's at the highest risk, that's engaged in this behavior, even if you horrible at services, somebody, you're going to impact somebody. If it's one out of, so that's going to be a decrease. The more efficient you are, there's going to be a decrease. But the challenge is the sustainability. And that's what a normative behavior comes in. Or else what you will have is this pressure on this organization to keep getting out front of incidents. So the goal of individuals in violence prevention organizations who take a public health or public safety approach is to stop it before something physical happens. And that's why they hold so dearly to this ideology around credible messenger, not just because of the lived experience, but this connectedness to the community, and not only intuition, but insight when things are going to happen. Let me give you another example, and then I'm open for any questions. If everybody been to high school, let me see, everybody been to high school, because some people might have skipped, I don't know. We might have a bunch of savants. In high school, no matter what high school you had a small group of kids that we might say was troublemakers or to stay away from, right? Everybody at the high school knew who they were. Some of the teachers didn't, but every student knew, like, nah, stay away from him, he do X, Y, Z. And because you knew that, you could identify when something happened, the likely person who did it. And also when it was gonna be a fight when we was growing up, before anybody, the teachers didn't know, but every student knew, like, hey, it's gonna be a fight after school. That's the same methodology with the credible messenger. By them being an insider on the insider-outsider continuum, when there's some conflict between two individuals and something is about to happen, the insiders know. The same way we knew, like, after school, two people were gonna fight, but the teachers had no clue. The teachers or the administration would have no clue, but all the students knew. It's the same example. And when we think about policing is responsive in nature. That's why policing is not the answer. Nobody calls the police and say, hey, I think something might happen today. Could you hang around? You don't call the police till after something happened and they try and solve it. Only time we have police on the front end is for security. If it's somebody or something of value, whether it's a person or if it's a football game or something like that, then you might have the police present before. But police don't just say, you know what? I think something might happen today. Let me hang around here. No, that don't happen. So that's the value of community-led organizations. They have this intel and these, not just the intel, but they have the relationships with the two people that have the conflict. So you have an opportunity to dissuade them prior to them getting in conflict, but you want to take it a step further. Not only dissuade them from this incident, but you want to get them involved in programming so that the next time they're in a conflict, they don't use violence as an alternative or as an option. Once we can remove violence as an option, that's when we won. And that's when you see your most success. And the reason why programs like Cure Violence and other programs work is we could look at New York. I like to look at the largest two cities, New York and LA. If you look in the 80s and 90s, both of them had about, LA was like at 1,300 homicides a year, and New York was around that too. Now both of them are around, New York was around 200 and LA was at 300, which is unreal considering New York has over 7 million people with 200 homicides. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And LA is phenomenal with 4 million people that only have 300 homicides with 4 million people. So it shows you that this comprehensive approach to violence utilizing individuals in the community works, but we have to be careful not to put all of the responsibility just on the organization and allow this interconnectedness to agencies. So like when an individual comes into the program, you can connect them to the services they need that can help them get their life back on track. I hope I gave you some information that was helpful, and I can answer any questions you have about violence prevention programs, all the way from ideation, how they start, to implementation, to training, whatever.
Well, let me ask you real quick, just to follow up, talking about New York and LA. How do we kind of think about the homicide rate in Washington, D.C. as we talk about that? Because we're at a 15-year high, but again, if you compare it to the numbers in the 90s, we don't want to take away from the 400 or 500 a year is tragic. Now down to 200, but a town of 600, 700,000 people.
I think, are you talking about this year or last year?
Yeah, I guess it's the uptick. I mean, I guess it's a lot of things, right? Because we have a mayor that's been pushing Muriel Bowser. I'll just put it in here because it is interesting to our conversation that she's declared that DC gun violence is a public health crisis. And it's the first time that we've seen after really kind of battling with the mayor, because she's been in opposition to a public health approach. She's wanted to increase police. We have 3,800 police officers, which is about twice per capita than most cities our size have regarding police. And now she's finally at a point after 6 or 7 years of pushing against public health approaches to finally completely having to say this is the only solution. And it's the first time she talked about bringing education with health, with different government services. So we're seeing an inflection point, whether or not she believes it or not, I'm not sure, but we're seeing an inflection point. So I guess I'm kind of curious how you see DC from your perspective, having worked on these issues.
You know what? I think there's a similarity in DC, Chicago, New York. All of them have, if you think about the spaces where violence occurs, typically they look the same, the characteristics. The first thing, a lot of people like to look at race, but the first thing I look at is poverty. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of disinvestment. So when you look at a space where there's a lot of disinvestment, then the second thing we look at, education. The educational system is typically broken. And I don't even know a lot about DC. So you're gonna say it's a large poverty. Educational system broken in those concentrated areas. So now what you have is individuals who can't find a space in society, the organic way, which would be you go to school, you more than likely go get a trade or go to college, and you kind of find your way in life, your purpose or your occupation in life. But when you're rejected the traditional way, you're gonna find a way under the subculture, which would be what? Crime. So typically when it's poor education and poverty, you're going to see high volumes of crime. And really, when you think about it, it's one human element that we all got in common, regardless of who you are. We want to be accepted in society. We want to find a place in society. So when they're rejected, this natural way, this unnatural way tends to lead to crime. And I'm going to tell you something. When you think about the subculture currency, which is typically wrapped around some form of violence, whether it's drugs, high volumes of drug sales, robbery or whatever, whatever crime, violence is attached to it because that's the normative behavior of that subculture. You cannot be involved in crime, no matter what it is, and not have violence coupled with it. Because you fall under different normative behavior. If you sell drugs, you got to protect the drugs. So it's no such thing as I'm a drug dealer, but I don't do no violence, or else everybody will take the drugs. Or I do this, I do credit card, but no, I got all this money, but no, I don't want no problems. I just want, no, because you dealing with that. I want us to wrap our minds around normative behavior. You're dealing with a community where this is normal. Violence is normal. Where not only is it normal, but it has to be within your toolkit in order to survive in this subculture. So typically, wherever you see violence, a lot of times it's segregated and it's saturated. It's saturated in spaces where the same things, poverty, unemployment, poor education, all of those things are it's not all the determinants of health typically are in those spaces. It's not like Washington is different, like you having these high crime rates in these affluent areas. That's not, if you told me that, I'd say, man, I got to come down there and do some research. You know, if it's high crime in those affluent areas, it's typically not violence. The research shows that it's typically break-ins or some type of robbery, but it's not high volumes of violence. And I'm gonna give you one more thing. One of the reasons why is something called social capital. People with social capital weigh it out in their rationale. I got something to lose. You see what I'm saying? I got something to lose. And when I say social capital, it's not always financial. You might say, I got a wife, children. I'm not gonna kill this guy because he bumped into me and lose my wife, my children, going to school. I'm in this club. You're a commissioner. You got social capital. But if you look in these spaces where it's what do they have to lose? So they're willing to go to the extreme over the most minuscule thing because they don't have nothing to lose. They don't have no social capital. Just something to think about.
Yes. A lot to think about. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Tillman, this is amazing. And I want to go take a class from you and do a lot more learning and reading. I did want to point out a couple of questions in the chat. So the first one's from Commissioner Quack, which you're welcome to come off mute and ask yourself directly, or I'm happy to read it.
So thank you, Dr. Tillman, and thank you, Professor Bonneau. I was just wondering if you had, based on your experience in Chicago and other training, are there any immediate action items that our neighbors can take to help spark social responsibility, almost like peer pressure, and affect change, much like the stigma you mentioned about smoking indoors? And can such a strong social stigma discourage the use of a knife or a gun in conflict resolution? Hopefully someday not even to owning a gun itself would be a stigma.
You know what? One of the things, marketing campaign, some type of, and it don't have, when I say marketing, don't think formally. I'm not necessarily talking about commercial or radio ads. We could start a culture where, just think about block clubs. We don't want that no more, and it'll become the culture and it'll catch on. And it's easy. I'm gonna tell you something. Things that's common sense are typically easier to catch on than things that are more radical. Like if you say, hey, from now on, we're gonna wear gloves when it's cold. I'm just saying, some people probably say, I don't wear no gloves, but they say, put the gloves on and say, yeah, this does feel better with some gloves on in the winter, so when you think about it, and then it's even easier when you get people of influence saying it. And not necessarily, when I say influence, they don't have to be an athlete or entertainer or a politician. It could be people with influence in the community, over social clubs, over block clubs. You know what? We're not going to do that. We're not barbecuing in the front yard no more. or what it could be something small. And we say, okay, yeah, this make more sense. And really one of the things, the best form of policing is when family police themselves and neighbors police neighbors. You know, you try and narrow it down. Because if you think about it, if everybody made a pledge to say, you know what, I'm just gonna make sure my children don't participate in no violent acts. That's it, just your children. If that catch on, then guess what's gonna happen? Violence the Russians ain't coming over here doing the shooting, or the Chinese or something, or they not coming from outer space. It's right in the community. So really, you really want people to just, it's the small things. If we could get don't even think big. Because if you think about that, you say, yeah, Chico, that's doable. We could convince people to say, you know what, I'm gonna talk to my children about not picking up a gun and shooting somebody. You know, just a small thing, and you be like, that ain't gonna work. But if everybody adopted, guess what? The shootings go down. So I think it's things we could do like in small clubs and stuff, and just picking up things. And a lot of times that makes sense. That's not controversial. That's humanistic, not this or that, you know, because when you get into gun safety laws, you run into all type of problems. You got, you know, people that's pro this and people anti that. You want stuff that makes sense, that, you know, something we all can agree on. Like, we're not gonna do this no more. We're not gonna throw trash in the middle of the street no more. Or
Okay.
something like, you know, or we're gonna shovel in front of our house when it snows. People say, yeah, because I don't want to fall, you know, yeah, just common sense things.
I wish it would happen. So it comes back to education and finding the right teacher and the right environment.
You say about education?
So it comes back to education and finding the right teacher.
Yeah, you
and
know
the
what?
Right environment. Okay.
The education piece is the education piece is huge, because it's a societal problem that America is enamored with people who have a bad guy image. If you think about historically, even in the movies, an action movie, one of the stars gonna be an antagonist, a bad guy. And the tough guy that's willing to go up against him, we love him, that's the hero. So a tough guy mentality is a societal concept or construct that people say, you know what? I can't be accepted going the traditional way through school, but you know, I can be tough. You know, so people really, like I said, the basic thing, a person trying to fit in society. And when we begin to shun behavior like that, just say, no, we're not tolerating that. If you shoot somebody, you know, even parents like, no, I can't have nothing to do with you if you're gonna be shooting people. It got to get that strong. And then people don't want to be ostracized, because we communal by nature.
Thank you.
Commissioner Morales?
First of all, Dr. Tillman, thank you so much for your comments earlier. That was really informative. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us tonight. I was hoping we could turn the conversation a little bit just towards the policy viewpoint, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
I'm like, as you were stating earlier, I'm in full agreement with, you know, empowering and funding organizations on the ground in our communities that are doing this sort of crime prevention or violence prevention, and, you know, focusing on the educational, you know, aspects and funding education to, you know, tackle the roots of the issues at their core, right? So, but one of the obstacles I think that we run into a lot when we had this conversation of public safety and improving public safety is, you know, funding, or where is this money going to come from in resources that are going to be deployed to do this? And I say that just because I'm a big proponent personally of the funding of the campaign to defund the police department. And I think that, you know, demilitarizing the police and, you know, tackling how the police is trained, even, you know, why, you know, for example, like why are the Israeli Defense Forces training American police officers? So my question to you is, do you think that, you know, focusing, we're running like a parallel campaign to tackle the political issues around policing, such as getting money out of the budget from the police and putting it back into education or into our communities in one shape or form. Do you think they can be done concurrently with the work that's been done on the ground by these community-based organizations that are doing the actual work of violence prevention?
I'm gonna say something, and I'm 50, even though I don't look like it. I'm gonna tell you something too. I'm gonna give you something. You say you're a commissioner?
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna teach you something that's gonna help your career. The way you frame something makes all the difference in the world. If you come in as a person that's a commissioner or a politician, and you come into a space and you say defund the police or take money from the police to do whatever, I guarantee you it's gonna be an adversarial conversation. Because some people, they gonna say, we need more. Anybody that's pro-law enforcement, it's gonna be an instant fight. Whether you win or not, who knows? Let me give you a way to frame that narrative to get the same objective, but just with a different. I would rather say, I believe our policemen are overworked and they're used in ways they're not trained. To take some of the responsibility off the police to be everything to everybody, we believe we should train people in the community to assist in policing themselves. That way I'm not attacking the police. You're saying the same thing. Therefore, the police can concentrate on the more serious incidents, and people in the community who are trained in behavioral health can deal with situations that revolve around behavioral health issues and not really policing matters. And if you want to use some examples, whether it's Jacob Blake, George, and just to say something, when you encounter an individual who has been diagnosed with a mental illness and they're at outbursts, they can't naturally or rationally respond to a directive because they're at outbursts. So they really can't hear, even though the police got a gun, sit down, they're at outbursts. That's a mental state where you can't rationalize. But see, you know what the difference is? A police officer doesn't know that because they're looking through a law enforcement lens. I gave this person a direct order. They're not being responsive. So this is the force that I need to get them to respond. Let's slide over here. A social worker knows, okay, I gave them a director. They're not responding. They're at outbursts. I got to bring them back down to baseline before they can connect with me and understand. I got to lower my voice. I got to change the way I look. They're going to know the tools to get them down to baseline, to get them to say, you know what? Now I need you to do blah, blah, blah. Because when you're at outbursts, have you ever been, I'll give you an example all y'all could relate to. Have you ever been in an argument with your significant other or a brother or sister, and before, y'all hollering at each other, and before they could finish talking, you saying something else, and you never heard what they said. Y'all not even listening to what each other said. Because you responding, especially in text. If you texting somebody and you texting back before you're not really reading what they saying. Because a lot of times after the argument, you'll say, why did you get mad? Well, you said, I never said that. Then you look back through the text, you said, oh my God, but you're at outbursts. It's not, and it's the same. Just imagine somebody in a traumatic situation. They at outbursts. They can't understand them directives. They're not going to respond correctly. And we need to say, we don't want to put law enforcement in a position to respond to mental health or SUD situations. We want the proper people responding to it. No, we're not trying to deplete the department, but we don't want them working overtime either. You're going to get billions if you say no more overtime. We don't want them. We want them to respond to policing matters. And that way you know, how could you get mad if you told the police, you know what, you've been overworked, you're dealing with trauma every day, and we just want you to deal with serious issues. And we want some of these people in the community that ain't doing nothing to get up and deal with the mental health and all these situations. You don't want them over, but you're saying the same thing. You're saying the same thing, but in a way that it won't come into a space and revert into an argument. Because the first thing they say when you ask for some of their money, it's a sign of they're not doing a good job. That's how they take it.
I only want to share, there's a group in Washington, D.C. that's fantastic. They're called Stop Police Terror Project. And every time somebody hears that, that makes them feel uncomfortable often. And the person says, do you think you could call it maybe Police Accountability Network? And the founder said, no, we use the word terror intentionally to agitate, to get people to think about it. So I do think there is a space and a place and time for the defund the police. And the rest of that phrase is defund police and reinvest in communities. And so that's kind of the type. So I think there's that balance between agitate and then what you're saying, Dr. Tillman, is so fascinating because so many of our residents are in a state of panic, in a heightened emotion. Those that want police, I think it's emotional to think that the police are going to respond to all of your situations. So I'm thinking now when I talk to people that are pro-police, they're in a state of emotion because they're fearful and they're turning towards police. So that's really interesting to think about that.
I only was saying use that tactic. What I'm talking to the commissioner about is when you're doing policy. I'm not saying take away the fund of police. I'm saying when you go in there and do policy, because it's hard to get bipartisan support. But remember, I say if you find that commonality, then how could a person agree with, yeah, I want my child to go to a good school too. Yeah, you want your child to go to a good school? Yeah, well, you got to put some money over here. Another thing, I want to say one thing too, right? And this simple mathematics. If you spend all your money on public safety, then you're gonna have a lot of people responding to incidents because no money is spent on public health. It has to be balanced. The more money you spend on public health, the less public safety have to respond. If you don't spend no money on preventive measures, it's gonna be a lot of, that's why they're working so much overtime. You gotta balance it out. And it's not like, it's nothing slick about it. It's not rocket scientists. If you don't spend no money off preventing situations, a good example, I always try and get a simplest example. If we stop buying alarms for our cars, people gonna start stealing them more. Insurance companies gonna pay more. It's gonna be a lot. If we just say, you know what, I'm gonna leave the keys in there. We just start leaving the keys in the car, no alarm, nothing. You know, just no alarms on car, it's gonna go, yeah, what's gonna happen? More cars gonna get stolen. And it's the same with policing. If we never spend no money on public health, on social workers, on mental health, then what? Every time it's a situation, the police gonna have to respond because they the only one with the resources and the capacity to respond.
I'd like to say that we had a situation in our neighborhood where we kept trying to get the alternative to police to take care of a mental illness, a mentally ill neighbor. And it was very, very sad. And we put all kinds of pressure on the alternatives to deliver, and they didn't. And finally, there was a big police intervention to move this guy out. And now he's in prison for having assaulted someone afterwards. I think I'm all for alternatives, but I think that the alternatives have to man up and say that they're going to deliver. And what we had was a social workers that did not deliver and made excuses for not delivering.
Could I say something? I'm gonna say this in the kindest way too. It's gonna always, nothing is 100%, and it's gonna always be, we don't want to we can't generalize because of isolated events. I'm not saying it's 100% proof. You're right.
I understand that. I
All
understand.
I'm saying is and I'm not saying policing bad. I'm saying we want to create balance in our community so that people feel safe and people get involved.
I'm not taking this one example as the situation, but what I am saying is that I don't like to see the police coming with all their lights and being in the alleys and all that. I've been in this neighborhood for too long.
Right.
And all of a sudden in the last year, now we have all kinds of more police here and much more aggression. But I do think that if we're going to say we want alternatives, then we have to say that those alternatives also deliver.
Yeah. Yeah, Rose, just for example, on July 4th, there is always firework danger. And it's explosive. They're not allowed in the district. And so for a good 2 months before July 4th, myself and Paul Jones, the president of the Columbia Heights Village Tennis Association, we wrote the Department of Public Works, we wrote Parks and Recreation, we wrote the council member, the mayor, some of the ANCs were working with us to try to get government. We said, let's try to talk to everyone that's not the police. And we had no luck. They just said, well, the police passed out pamphlets. So then I go and talk to Commander Emmerman of the 3rd District, our commander, and I said, hey, is there any alternatives that would not involve you? And he goes, we sit at these government interagency meetings and we simply they say, who's going to address this? And he said, the second that happens, you could hear a pin drop. Nobody says anything and everybody looks at the police and expects it. So it's to your point, Rose, the alternatives to it's just not conditioned, and the alternatives aren't conditioned not to go to the police. They're conditioned to go to the police as well. So yeah, I hear you.
I want to ask y'all a question though, right? I like what you said, Rose, and that's a beautiful point you brought. If you say it's frustrating that, it is frustrating to hear the police, because I live in downtown Chicago. But I grew up on the west side of Chicago where you see the police often, all of that, right? Imagine the trauma, the mindset of individuals who many times innocent, coming from school, person getting off of work, because of the tension and because of this concentrated group of people that are doing crime, live through this day after day after day. So what I'm saying is, because the resources are so concentrated too in middle class and affluent areas, that they create this environment that's a pool for crime. So really, I'm not just talking about violence prevention programs. I think Bob hit on it earlier, and my other brother hit on it earlier. You got to get better schools and other stuff too. And I'm gonna say it again, one organization or one group of social work, it has to be a collective idea that everybody buys into for it to really work. Because, and I'm gonna be honest, in some cases, I'm not an advocate for people going to jail or prison, but some people need some tough correction. If they go, some people, everybody, the social workers can't deal with. You right. Hey, this one ain't trying to hit no therapy, nothing. He a little bit beyond right now. He need a little bit more extra attention. I'm not saying, and that's what the police for, the most serious cases. So I'm not saying defund or destroy the police department, but I'm saying for the most cases, the mass majority, you can deal with, and let them deal with the extreme. But you gotta put resources more. It gotta be more than just saying we're gonna get a violence prevention group. You gotta say, okay, after we do this, we're gonna work on the schools. And it don't have to be a lot of money. Everything ain't about money neither. It's just making a concentrated effort to make it a better space for people to live. And then this evolution will allow it to get better over time.
Chander or Lauren, if either of you wanted to make a comment or ask a question, I know it can be kind of hard to jump in. I know you all have been active in the chat, which I appreciate, but just wanted to give you space.
Yeah, Mr. Tillman, my name is Chander Jayaraman. one of the things I'd always been thinking about is, we have this police force. It doesn't look like neither on the mayor's side or which really is a defining group entity to reduce the number of police. I had an idea about maybe retraining a whole group of MPD officers to become what I call de-escalators. So if there's an incident involving individuals, that an officer who has the right training responds to that scene. The reason I said officers was because a couple of things. One is they have a relationship with the other officers, meaning if they went through the academy, went through kind of the same things, they built that relationship, but their role would be different, and that they get the first shot at de-escalating the situation, knowing that they're the folks that they came up with in the ranks are behind them, but they get the first shot of de-escalating the situation before it turns to more violence. I know that's kind of slightly off topic, but what do you think about that in terms of police reform?
Would they have guns, Chander, in your head?
How you know that's what Bob?
that's
How you steal my answer?
Like gun.
No, they would not. In my view, they would not, because you already have armed officers. They, in their role, would not be armed.
I don't even know if you could be a police officer without a gun, because this is why I say that the law is of none effect without enforcement. So really, you don't have the same strength without the whole kit and caboodle. Like, just an example, if you run a red light and never got a ticket, or you run it, it's gonna be it can be problematic for that.
Well, you're not going at it individually. I mean, you have every officers responding, but you get to go up there first. Your fellow officers around you, but you get to do the first shot of de-escalating the situation before, and knowing that your fellow armed officers have your back.
It's interesting. It could be only thing I think it could be problematic is because you still a police officer, and what if it's an instance in where a crime is taking place? Because a lot of times when this guy robbed this person, or this guy took something from some, or this person assaulted this person, and you don't want it to escalate to violence. As a police officer, you have to be talking about arrest, unless you're gonna do diversion or restorative action. I think it's something worthy of conversation, but it's complex enough that we would have to really take a deep dive and deconstruct it and see what it'll look like. Would they be in uniform? Are they community residents? Like neighborhood watch, because it sounds a little bit like neighborhood watch, a little bit like neighborhood watch when you say they're unarmed, but this relationship, but then you say they went through police training. So it's we'll have to really deconstruct it and look at it and say, okay, what does it look like? And I think the young lady Lauren said something real powerful that I love. Getting people within the community would be critical to be police officers. I think that is more fascinating because of the relationship, not so much the relationship and the cultural sensitivity. If you think about affluent communities, one of the reasons why they police difference is why. When I stop a kid, hey man, I know your parents. Who you some kid to? Oh, I'm gonna take you home. That's why. It ain't because he say he could look, he ain't got no see-through vision or some x-ray vision where he could see or clairvoyant, oh, this kid gonna be good. He know his parents. So he humanizing the person as opposed to objectifying him. He's not looking at him as a criminal. He's saying, oh, okay, that's Bob's son, or that's Laura's son. Okay, let me take you to your parents. What you doing out here? It's worthy of a conversation. And plus you have them communal ties. And I want to tell you too, what I like about the community aspect is every interaction is not negative. I think that's problematic too. Like if every time you're approached by a police is because he suspects you're doing something wrong, then you and the police relationship is going to be bad, because every time he interrogating you about, what are you doing? Are you doing? But if it's a person in the community, sometimes I might say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? How your family? That's the biggest difference. So you got to give, if a person, community policing, where police from the community have relationships with individuals and all of that, changes the whole dynamics. Because you think about it, what if it was your neighbor's son and you seen him doing something? What's on your mind is not shooting him or nothing like. Even if he broke the law and you handcuffed him, you're still going to treat him like a human because that's your neighbor's son. So that's the way I think about it. And I think you brought up a beautiful point. I saw yours and I saw her in the chat, and I just thought it was fascinating.
So I want to be respectful of time. We typically try to wrap up around like 8:15. So Dr. Tillman, if you're able to stick with us a little longer, that's wonderful. If not, we really, really appreciate all the time you've given us already. And I did want to think about if anyone is interested in working with me on some draft testimony for the oversight hearings that are coming up, if you can let me know. I'm also happy to work on, just some like draft talking points that folks can customize and think about your own, personalizing it so that it's not just some form, testimony that we're submitting as well.
Can you repeat the date, Lila?
March 4th. And it runs from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. because there's 3 offices within the committee's jurisdiction that they're hearing from that day. So I don't know what time the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement piece is going to take place. But I think they will post that hopefully shortly. So yeah, like I said earlier, you're able to submit testimony via recorded voicemail, a PDF, or live on Zoom. And I think Dr. Tillman has given me a lot to think about, and I've seen a lot of good resources that Bob and others have been dropping into the chat, just as we think about sort of that end goal versus today's reality and where we're seeing investments or lack thereof in different parts of our system. And Dr. Tillman, something you said that really resonated with me is not putting all the pressure on a single group to succeed to solve the problem. And I have heard that there's a very high rate of turnover among violence interrupters here in DC because they are underpaid and overworked, and a lot is put on them. And so I'm wondering if that might be an area that we could focus some of our support.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing too, trying to get them some support around mental health. I think it's a stigma when you work in that space. I worked in that space over a decade, and it's similar to being a police officer. You appear weak when you get some help. But you have to think about it. Most of these individuals are either dealing with individuals that got shot or killed every day. So it takes a toll on you. It can, in particular, when you have an individual in the program who's at the highest risk and they get killed. They still, we humans, you build a relationship with a person, you think they're doing better. They might relapse, or something that's in their past might cause them to get killed. It pulls at your heart. So I think I don't think we give enough credit to those individuals. I think they have stepped up humongously during COVID because they have reached a population that's hard to reach, that many people in society can't reach. And I think we need to professionalize what they're doing. It's important to professionalize them as public health workers, and that they're working with a population that's hard to reach, and wrap support around them. Yeah, I think that's critical.
There's a city that has, I forget which city, but there's a city that's embedded mental health professionals with, I believe it's the police, who have to deal with opioids and opioid overdoses because it takes a mental health toll on the responders, on the first responders. And so it's helped them be better at their jobs in dealing with the issues by it being out in the, in the light that we need our mental health taken care of as well.
Yeah, that's critical. That's critical. And remember, the key, like we talked about earlier, is cultural change too, to let people know it's okay to get help. And one of the things I often tell groups or organizations is to put protocols in place, because if the culture in that particular profession is not to seek help, then even when people do need help, they won't. But if you change the protocol to everybody that was involved in this particular situation, you have to see, you have to do a check-in with the clinician. And then the person that really needs help can get help without feeling ostracized or feeling as if they're showing weakness by going to seek help.
I think we could stay on for hours and talk about a lot more issues. But, we got to limit our time on Zoom. I'll speak for myself. So I just want to ask everyone to join me and Bob, if you have any final words here, in thanking Dr. Tillman, just so generous with your time and expertise. And yes, I'm seeing lots of visual rounds of applause. So thanks for logging on from Chicago to spend some of your evening with us. If I can post them in the notes as well, but you can see other resources and events Dr. Tillman's been a part of. So I know I'm going to do some more learning, but Dr. Tillman, if you have other resources that you want to, we can email later about, that would be great.
Perfect.
And just thank you so much. And Bob, did you want to say anything?
No, that's awesome. I really appreciate all you sharing with us tonight. And there's a lot I'll continue to struggle in my ignorance with all of this stuff. So I really appreciate it, man.
Also, I'm willing, anybody need my information, you want to reach out with any questions or concerns. Because for real, we all trying to do the same thing, and that's save lives and make our community safer. So I'm all about that, and I'm open-minded. I don't know everything. I'm open-minded to new ideas and us doing whatever it takes to make our community safer throughout the United States and hopefully throughout the world.
Thank you.
All right, with that, thank you so much for having